Hey guys, and welcome to the inaugural episode, the maiden voyage of Talking TNA, and as you see below me, total nonstop adventure, at least for this guy, Ray Russell, because this is going to be my first time traveling through the world of TNA from the very beginning, and we're all going to kick it off with one of the greatest guests of all time here in the WrestleCopia world. I want to welcome back the man, the myth, the legend. He is the two-man power trip of wrestling. He is John Poz. Welcome back to the WrestleCopia-verse.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you having me. And I love this total nonstop adventure that you want to go on. I love it.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen you since we went to the movies and saw No Holds Barred. It was about time to get you back into play here on WrestleCopia. And actually, maybe, did we cover the 90s WWF on your end after that? Because we did talk about Hulk Hogan in the 90s as well recently.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. We went through some of his best matches of the 90s. And I know people will be surprised, but there was a bunch to discuss.
Well, you know, it's subjective. Of course, it's Hulk Hogan, so it was hard for me to find some. No, he certainly had some high-profile matches. It was a lot easier to go through the 80s. We did, when we covered that too in your two-man power trip world. But John, speaking of, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you got going on right now, man?
So right now, just follow me at Two Man Power Trip on Instagram and Twitter. Got a bunch of stuff going on. Got a new Russo episode coming out about the final. Which is just interesting to get some his takes on that. Got working on Tiger Ali Singh, working on a podcast with him, which is pretty unique and pretty different, pretty rare because he doesn't really get out there and do any interviews and stuff like that. And then just got my regular show where random guys coming on, like the Demon Dale Torborg will be on in the future. Doug Masters, the pretty boy, will be on in the future. Roger Sartan, who's a territory wrestler, will be on. I know a lot of your listeners will know who he is. So it's a very interesting world. So just follow me at Two Man Power Trip for all the latest and greatest from the Two Man Power Trip.
Sounds good. We'll talk a little bit more about that before we say goodbye. But right now we're saying hello to a brand new video cast. It's been months in the making. We teased it coming into the new year. It's one of the new available video cast series, part of the ultimate tier here at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. And this edition of Talking TNA, John, I'm going to throw you some softball questions here up front before we actually talk TNA. So let me take you back to a young John Poz, younger John Poz. Of course, you're not that old, but let's go back to the end of the ECW, early 2001, just a couple months later, the end of WCW, all at the same time. It was really jarring as a fan who grew up being able to watch wrestling 7 days a week, counting ESPN. And now we're down to one company on television, the WWF, WWE, very shortly thereafter. John, what are your memories of this time period? With wrestling going away, there was just one guy left standing, Vince McMahon.
I just remember being absolutely kind of shocked and saddened and just like upset about it, just because, all right, I wasn't that big of an ECW fan, but I would follow it and I would watch some of the big shows and I'd catch up with it casually. So it's like, okay, and that's one place for a guy like Sid, for instance, just randomly can just show up, or Scott Hall, or Al Snow, and almost like reinvent yourself, or show up out of nowhere, or be like Bam Bam Bigelow, and just completely be awesome there. And you know what I mean? It just was one of the places to work, and one of the places like, oh, I feel like watching wrestling, I'll watch some ECW, or I'll catch up on ECW, see what they're doing. That's one instance. WCW I was obsessed with, watched every show. I tried to watch Saturday night, even during the dying days, I was trying to watch Saturday night, even though it kind of stunk towards the end, but I was watching the Thunders. I was watching Nitro every week. I was actually kind of getting back into it in 2001. I thought they were kind of righting the ship. I thought they were kind of heading in the right direction. I know Johnny Ace was at the helm with Bischoff, really kind of running things behind the scenes, but Johnny Ace seemed to have them headed in the right direction, just as far as like they were having consistent good matches on the last three pay-per-views. It kind of seemed like it was headed in a better direction. I know the Magnificent Seven might not have been everybody's cup of tea, but it was kind of like their version of the NWO, but with Scott Steiner kind of ruling the roost. And he was one of my favorite wrestlers, so I thought he was awesome. Booker T was on the rise. He's obviously coming back. So there was a lot of interesting stuff. I even loved Dustin Rhodes, what he was doing when he was the original American Nightmare in 2001. So I was really pissed when WWF bought it, because like, damn it, I thought they were on a roll. I thought we were headed in the right direction. I thought we would, have something substantial here where we could, build on WCW again, where they were going to be not maybe number one, but a good number two. And they became in 2000 a horrible number two. So man, once you lose WCW, and then it's like, okay, maybe ECW is kind of your last hope, but then you lose ECW before you lose WCW. So it's like, oh my God, all we have is Vince, and you know what Vince is going to do. He's going to bury all those guys, and none of them are going to get a push. And obviously, okay, Rock's going to fight Booker T, and The Rock's going to win. Undertaker's going to fight DDP, and Undertaker's going to win, and Undertaker's wife's going to beat up DDP, and you know, I mean, you saw everything. The writing was on the wall, was just absolutely terrible. And then the fact that they try to save it and have Steve Austin, the guy who got fired from WCW via FedEx, he was supposed to be the head of WCW. It was like, that was brutal. Just a brutal time period. Absolutely hated it.
It was definitely hard times as a wrestling fan to get through. You talked about, and I think we're going to use this term here a few times throughout this episode, an alternative. And that's what ECW truly was to me, that fateful night in March of 1996 when my brother was spending the night and I had been accustomed to WCW Prime coming on in the middle of the night. Ooh. And the guide simply said, wrestling. And my brother said, oh, what's that at 2 a.m. in the morning? We're a couple of teenagers, hanging out. Yep. And I said, oh, that's WCW Prime, but I'll turn it on anyway because it's wrestling. We both loved wrestling. So I flip it over there, and I'm starting to process, what the hell is this? I know that's Raven. This must be either Shane Douglas. This must be ECW. I think it was the lesbian kiss angle was the first episode that I got. And my brother's like, what the hell? There's girls kissing, beautiful women kissing, and there's all this crazy stuff going on. And I had been getting the magazines religiously, so I'd been following ECW, or at least what Apter was telling me about ECW for the last couple of years. And by that point, I had gotten a couple tapes too through the magazines, Three-Way Dance and a couple other tapes around Christmas time of 95. So I was like, oh my God, I now have access to ECW, and I watched it I think twice I fell asleep, but I set it to record. Over the next couple of years, I watched every episode of ECW. Nice. Can't remember if it was Friday nights or Saturday nights at 2 a.m., but it was must-see TV for me. And, and of course it's going to change over time. They take the talent, the big two take the talent, and Paulie has to keep reinventing, and we get some of the bigger guys, the younger indie guys later on. But when it went away, I wasn't big into the business side of how the structure financially of wrestling. I didn't get the Observer, but I knew when they said ECW went away, I was like, oh, that sucks. But it didn't shock me because you could just see guys just, jumping ship left and right. And it sucked. You're right. And then 2 months later, and I was heavily into the internet by the early AOL days. So by that point, I was certainly religiously reading all of the news and the rumors of the demise of WCW and say it ain't so. And now it's gone. And all of this in a matter of a couple months. And like you said, Vince, he took who he wanted. He sent some of them developmental. Some of those guys panned out, maybe. Most of them didn't. And some of them went away forever. They lost their interest in pro wrestling, unfortunately. But I remember telling my son, when I would talk about, the dying days of WCW, I'm talking about 99, 2000, the slow decline. Yep. And then I would go, but at the end, there was AJ Styles, and there was a cruiserweight tag division, and Ken Romeo, who wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but it was something different. And there was all these, Elix Skipper and all this stuff. And he's like, oh, it sounds like WCW really turned at the end. I said, it did, but it was just too little too late.
Definitely too little too late. It kind of sucked too when you think about it. It's just like, all right, finally turning the corner here. I sat through so much bad shit just to kind of get to this point. Although it's funny though, if you really kind of look back, I know so many people say this, if you actually watch some of that stuff and just watch some of the stuff today, I enjoy some of the stuff today, but I take WCW 2000 over some of the stuff that I've seen today. So it's kind of like a weird thing where it sucked because WWF was kind of kicking their ass at the time. They were a lot better. Right. But it maybe not necessarily wasn't as bad as maybe you perceive looking back, just because of the competition then versus what you have now. Some of that stuff though, like in 2001, I was really digging. I was like, all right, here we go, and then WWF buys it shockingly, and that's a whole different story for a whole another day. How the hell they bought it for that cheap, and you know what I mean, like so shady by Vince. But obviously, great businessman. Well,
yeah, great business, absolutely. Eric talks about getting some investors together, and they were going to buy it, but there was no television station that would run the wrestling product.
Yeah, Fusion Media Ventures.
Without TV, buddy, there's no wrestling, and that's another thing we're going to talk about here with TNA too, because they didn't necessarily follow that strategy. I'm sure they would have loved to have, but given the opportunity or lack thereof, they go in a different direction. So we need another company. There is no ECW. There is no WCW. There is no alternative. We needed an alternative. My personal situation here, John, and we're going to circle back to the beginnings of TNA, but actually watching TNA, I want to get your memories of the announcement of TNA and I know your early purchases of the pay-per-view.
I remember like when it first like was an idea, I'm like, man, they're gonna have weekly pay-per-views for $9.99 on a Wednesday. I was like, all right, hopefully my dad doesn't mind this too much. It's gonna be $40 a month technically, so it's gonna be like one pay-per-view if you think about it. But I was like, maybe if you get enough people to buy it. But then I'm thinking to myself, kind of skeptical. I'm like, I don't know if this is a great idea. I know I'll do it, but I'm kind of in the minority. And then I love Jeff Jarrett. I always thought Jeff Jarrett was kind of underrated or underutilized. Or I feel like when he was WCW champion, so many people were saying, "Oh, he shouldn't have been champion." I was like, about time he's champion. He should have been champion, or at least feuding with Steve Austin and WWF. That's a different story for another day too. Obviously, why he never did, and Austin kind of squashed that. But I always felt like he should have been in Triple H role, and then Triple H kind of should have been in his role. I felt like Jarrett was more of a main event ready guy. So when he got the helmet TNA, I'm like, all right, here we go. Now we're gonna kind of see what he can. Then you see Scott Hall's on board. Then you see Ken Shamrock's on board. AJ Styles, who I knew from WCW. Didn't know him from Wildside, but I knew him from WCW. So I didn't really find out afterwards until I got a couple Wildside DVDs. I'm like, man, this guy was good for a little bit here before he kind of came on the radar on WCW. So I was kind of like intrigued. I was interested. I thought it could be cool. I thought it was going to be different. And then like the NWA part, I thought it was going to be kind of cool with the tradition, but then mix in some new stuff and this X Division stuff and these guys that could really work and really wrestle. So I was kind of into it, but again, I was kind of shocked because it's like, wait, they don't have a TV deal. They're not on TV. They're only pay-per-view. It almost seems like it's one of those like Girls Gone Wild things. You know what I mean? Like you're only on pay-per-view. So I was very, very nervous about it, but I was hopeful because WWF, even in 2002, they were okay. I mean, obviously the Hogan return got me into it, but man, they were kind of sliding downhill. And then SummerSlam was good. So there was like good and bad for 2002. And I went to Survivor Series 2002. I liked it, but it was like, man, once you started getting into like 2003, they were terrible. So it was like 2002 was kind of like the last bastion, but still I needed something else, another wrestling league to watch. And that was going to be it because I didn't get into ROH until 2003.
It's funny you mentioned 2003 kind of being really that bad point because my son, before he started binging WCW, was binging the WWF, and he got to the Royal Rumble 2003. He watched the Royal Rumble, and he goes, I'm done. Just turn. It's kind of like the Forrest Gump where he's running, and I don't feel like running anymore.
He
didn't feel like
except for Benoit Angle sucked. Yep.
Yeah, that was good. That was a great way to kick it off too. But that was my son. You know, he's like, I don't feel like watching this anymore. And it was kind of like, you know what, you feel it too, don't you? But I remember going in the fall. I think it was the fall of 2002 to a house show, a SmackDown house show, I believe it. They drew like 3,000 fans to which then was the Gund Arena, and they usually drew better than that. So it was just really getting flat. But you made another good point. The boom period was gone. The Attitude Era, the NWO, the Austin era with Vince McMahon, it was kind of on the decline, you know, certainly by 2002. And so with that boom being gone, it was a lot harder to get your friends who were only there for that Attitude Era. You know, a lot of people jumped on that bandwagon when people were cussing and there were breasts flying around and all these fun things were going on the TV screen and suck it and all that stuff. But now it's you can't do that anymore. Vince wants Coca-Cola and he wants all these great advertisers and things. And so, the Godfather had to get a real job and things like that. Yep. So we see a big change, a shift in the WWF product, the WWE product. The boom period's gone. Contracts, the WCW, the big names are not gonna. Why risk getting hurt? Why risk taking a pay cut to continue to work? Only Booker T and DDP, off the top of my head, took that cut, if I remember correctly. Yep. But guys like, the NWO, Hall and Nash, and even Rey Mysterio, Scott Steiner, those guys were smart. They sat at home and they got paid the rest of their WCW payouts. So that was another rough one to TNA couldn't use that either.
Yeah, I was always just astounded by like Vince's business acumen because he's such a smart guy. I'm not spending the money buying these guys out of their contract. Guess what happens when he signs Goldberg? He didn't sign him out of his contract in 2001. He brings him in right in 2003, paid him like triple and less dates. So it's like, wow, that's really like bad business. You actually ended up paying up the guy way more money for way less dates. You could have just bought him there and had this gigantic boom, Austin versus Goldberg or whatever. So then you look at it, Hall and Nash, they bring him in later for decent money. Hogan, you bring him in obviously a little bit later for more money. Flair, you bring him in for a boatload of money. Steiner, they brought in for a decent amount. So it's like, wow, they ended up bringing in all the guys eventually, and some of them, like Goldberg and Hogan, you ended up paying more. Right. So it's like, man, that's one of the bad decisions. It's like, okay, Booker and DDP are good, but when you're having that invasion, you're expecting Hall, Nash, you're expecting the NWO, you're expecting Bischoff too, by the way, and you're expecting Hogan, and you're expecting Goldberg, and you're expecting Sting. So
sure. And I think, that was 50% of the failure. The other half was Vince was never going to push WCW to the same level as his company, pal. We can't do that. Heaven forbid. We couldn't even do that 20 years later with Sting and give him a freaking win on WrestleMania, for goodness sake.
Crazy. He still was obsessed with that. Oh, my God, what a nut.
Yeah, but I think back, you make excellent points there with the guys sitting there riding their contracts out, and Vince not really, in the grand scheme of things, Vince may have been thinking, where are they going to go, pal, when their contract does, they're going to come to me crying. But sometimes I think it worked out in his favor, other times not so much. And there were guys that burned their bridges in the past that learned. Lex Luger, Jeff Jarrett, to name a couple right off the top of my head. Buff Bagwell, cup of coffee right there. Bagwell's quote unquote run with the WWF as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, though, you look at all that talent. Some guys are sitting at home with a WCW contract. Other guys Vince bought up. Other guys may have become disillusioned with the business altogether. Enter Jeff Jarrett, who's one of the guys that are kind of blackballed at that point in time from the WWE. So he's got nowhere to work. And he takes some time off. I've heard him mention that time and time again.
Summer of no worries. Yes.
But the summer of no worries, exactly. But the idea comes up, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But you talked about your early memories of watching the pay-per-views, getting the pay-per-views. And I think the point I was trying to make earlier when I said the boom period was over was a lot of those friends that I had that were, it was just cool to watch wrestling and wear the NWO shirts and the 316 shirts. They weren't watching wrestling no more. It wasn't cool anymore. We're moving on. And so they're not going to come over and pay that $9.99. I could have easily, a few years earlier, are you kidding me? I could have found, I wouldn't even have to pay anything. I could have said, find 4 friends and each, they cycle through and they pay, and I'm just sitting there. I could have done here. Yep. I would have been paying the entire 40 myself. So instead, I got it through tape trading, guys. So, hopefully
you cheap bastard.
Well, the times have passed by now, so hopefully nobody can come after me for that. Yes. But no, I think after the first 2-3 months, I did a tape trade and I got the first 6 shows. So the first month and a half, whatever the case may be. And I watched the first show and I watched the second show and I stopped, John. And I said, you know what? And remember, this was huge back in the day, long before podcasting. Everybody loved to type up reviews. From Scott Keith down the line, you write the reviews. You're witty, but you also try to have some fun, but you also try to pick it apart and what's good, what's bad, what you enjoy, and entertain people in your writing. And I was one of those guys at that point in time. So I said, wait a minute. I'm going to wait till I have a little free time. There's going to be a few more pay-per-views. And then I'm going to start doing that. So I'm going to review TNA. But then life happened. I had my child and we had other things going on and we moved out and, real life hit me and it just sat there and it sat there and it sat there to the point where people said TNA ain't cool no more. Everything, this sucks, that sucks. I said, well, that doesn't really make me want to go back and review this stuff. So I moved away and it just sat there in the back of my mind laying dormant. And for years I said, I'm still going to review that someday. I'm still going to watch TNA someday. And nearly 24 years later, here we go. We're finally going to do it right here at WrestleCopia. We're finally going to get into the origins of TNA wrestling.
I feel like, though, people were doing that and saying that, like, negatively TNA and LOL TNA, all that, stuff making fun of TNA and ripping and stuff. I always felt like it almost got a bad rap because some of it was good. Obviously, there is some stupid stuff. There is some bad stuff in there. Yeah. Some stuff you just got to almost, shake your head and laugh at. But there was actually a lot of good stuff. Like, the X Division stuff is great. Creating a bunch of new stars, a bunch of great guys. Like AJ Styles being your top dog and top wrestler, there's nothing to shake a stick at. I mean, he's one of the best ever. So that was awesome. I always thought Jarrett and his run there and his matches were great. The Birth, if you look at the X Division, that style, everybody kind of wrestles that style now. Literally even the main event will wrestle that style now. And then eventually they signed Samoa Joe and he has an awesome run there. Years later, the Main Event Mafia, I feel like doesn't get enough love. That was such a great gimmick. Obviously kind of like an NWO ripoff or almost like a Millionaires Club kind of thing ripoff from WWE, but except for they were the heels, which maybe they really should have been anyway in WWE if you think about it, but they just weren't getting booed. But I don't know. I feel like the TNA, they did have a bunch of bright spots and like stuff where I always would go back and even watch. Like if AJ Styles, Jerry Lynn, Low Key, Psychosis, Chris Daniels, like those guys, and we're talking early TNA, any of those guys were in a match, usually it was really good. And you literally said to yourself, wow, that was worth the $10 alone. Like just their match alone. Like, wow, that was worth $10. Wow, AJ Styles, he wins the X Division title, beats Low Key or whatever. They continue their feud. Then you throw Jerry Lynn in, Jerry Lynn versus AJ. So I always felt like you were getting your money's worth, and I feel like some of the people that were ripping it, I don't know, I feel like sometimes they do it to be funny or cheeky or whatever. I'm like not 100% with them on ripping it.
Well, I'm not, and this is what the real fun part is for me. I get to decide on my own when the rails fall off, when the wheels fall off, if they fall off at all, and I'm sure they will at some point, because I remember it being pretty bad, just kind of reading little, notes and things people were posting, but that's years down the line at the very least. And so I'm looking forward to this, and people are going, Ray, there's no way in nearly a quarter of a century you've never seen any TNA. Well, you're right. I saw the first couple pay-per-views. I saw the first episode that went head-to-head with Raw. I was very curious there. I said, we might be onto something here. I didn't really necessarily, I was giving them an opportunity, but I wouldn't really care for the way they shook things out there. And I've seen, little bits and pieces of clips going back to Elix Skipper walking the top of the cage and things like. So yeah, I've seen bits and pieces. I've probably seen a couple X Division matches over my lifetime. It's been years though, to the point where I don't remember anything about them. So I'm looking forward to doing this, from the beginning, from the jump, as they say. And it really, I like how you pointed out that everybody to the main event now wrestles that style. And you can credit Japan, you can credit Lucha Libre, you can credit the indies of this era, certainly. I mean, you go back and watch some of the indies from the Combat Zone on down the line, all the guys were trying all these things, but TNA made it, national, if you will, if you got the pay-per-views, those X Division matches, especially. And that's one thing I like that you said was, for $10, if I had one of those really good opening WCW pay-per-view matches and I paid $10, I said, yeah, I'm good. I don't care what's on the rest of the pay. And that's the kind of feeling that I feel like TNA probably did, produce as well, especially with the names you gave. Was one really good match for $10. Yeah, I'll give you $10 if you want to entertain me for 20 minutes. And that's exactly what I think what really helped TNA in the beginning to, I mean, obviously they weren't thriving, certainly not in 2002, as I'll be talking about in business moving forward as I cover some of the TV or the pay-per-views and whatnot. But you go back and you look in the structure of the pay-per-view, we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's an excellent point. For $10, maybe not every week, but if there's a match, if it's the impulse buy, I'm doing nothing, it's Wednesday night, wrestling's coming on, yeah, I got $10, what am I going to do with 10? I mean, 12-pack of beer back then, but, it's in many ways.
I would actually tape it with the VHS. I put two episodes on one tape, so 4 hours worth, and I would go back and I would fast forward, but I would rewatch certain matches. So in my head, it's really worth the $10 because I watched AJ versus Jerry Lynn twice. So you know what I mean? But I would try to record them and put them on the VHS were 4 hours worth and get them both on one tape and then rewatch them to really make it worth the money. So in my head, I was like, oh man, this is good investment because I can actually rewatch some of this stuff because a lot of the matches were good back in 02. So even like when they brought in Amazing Red too, that was my first exposure of him. And then obviously ROH became, I became a fan of ROH and got exposed to him there. But I was like, man, they bring in some really good X Division talent, especially.
Well, nobody's getting TV besides Vince McMahon. So Ring of Honor starts up around this time, and their only way to succeed in their minds is through video releases. You got to buy the videos and check out all the big stars there in ROH. And XWF was also another attempt at basically WCW light. I mean, very much it felt like with Tony Schiavone and Jerry Lawler's the announcers, and Kurt Hennig was there, and Hulk Hogan. Obviously, Hulk Hogan was a major part of that, and it was like, well, this might be the new WCW, and that was kind of a thing where I was like, I'm going to lay back on this for a few months, but if this takes off, I'm all in. And it went away before I was ready to even get invested, and unfortunately. Yeah,
years later, I got the XWF DVD and watched the whole thing, but I was like, oh, it's kind of cool. It's like WWE Saturday Night, like a bit, kind of cool. Yeah. Obviously, Vince goes and steals Lawler, Sable, Mr. Perfect, Hogan, Piper. So obviously he saw something with XWF where he didn't like what he saw and he's going to steal the guys. and boom, it's done.
If nothing else, it led to those guys getting some decent paychecks in the future. If it did nothing else for anybody. No Brian Knobbs rehire by the WWE out of that.
That one hurt.
Well, another thing that was going on around this time was the World Wrestling All-Stars. John, do you know anything about the World Wrestling All-Stars?
Oh, yeah. I used to actually order those pay-per-views once in a while, too. Yeah. Just because I like the names. Obviously, Andrew McManus is running. I have no idea who that guy is at this point. But I recognize, like, well, Bret Hart's going to be on one of them. Disco Inferno is on it. Conan is going to be on it. Sting is going to be on it. Lex Luger. So they did have some good names. And then randomly they have, like, a good kind of a cruiserweight style match, like Hoovy would be wrestling Psychosis or something. I don't remember if it was Psychosis, but I remember Hoovy had a couple of good matches on there. But yeah, he would order WWA once in a while too.
So WWA, for those of you who don't know, and I'm not going to break down the entire company, but like you said, it was promoted by a guy by the name of Andrew McManus, who was an Australian concert promoter, a successful concert promoter. I've seen some of the groups that he promoted, out there in Australia, and it's a who's who, literally, of American rock talent and R&B and all kinds of great stuff. So the guy knows his music promoting. He doesn't know his wrestling promoting, and that's kind of where it all falls off the rails. He has some investors, some bankers and things involved when he needs them to. They're throwing him some cash here and there to keep him afloat, this wrestling thing afloat. Because in his mind, from my understanding, according to Jeff, and again, a lot of this, that we're going to talk about, I've heard Jeff at his podcast talk about the origins of TNA. Jerry Jarrett put out a book talking about the origins of TNA in his book. So I take some, notes from both of those guys. But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to sit here and dissect truths from fiction. Jeff tells it one way, Jerry tells it another. I tend to believe Jeff a little more than, Jerry's Carney version, if you will, RIP to Jerry. But it's, I'm sure there's another version out there too. And Bob Ryder probably had a version, and a lot of guys were involved. But basically what all starts is Jeff Jarrett said that I think maybe his father, I'm not sure, don't quote me on that, but it was Jeff Randy Savage and somebody, it might've been Jerry, got together and talked about running a wrestling company. And Savage was going to put in a few million of his own to get something maybe up and running. They go and meet an investor in New York City the week before 9/11, directly across the street from the World Trade Center, I believe Jeff said. And they get together and they start talking business, and Savage may be the booker and getting some equity out of it. And he was very interested, and we may have seen something come to fruition out of that, but it wasn't meant to be. 9/11 happens, everything kind of shuts down and goes away. And it wasn't meant to be. And then fast forward a little while later here, the WWA, Randy Savage's name comes up again. I don't know if you know this story, and I'm going to let you elaborate here if you do. But apparently Andrew McManus had Savage booked to work Jeff Jarrett in the main event. I believe it was for the pay-per-view. They were going to bring it. They were going international. They've been running the shows in Australia. They came to Vegas, and they did I think their last pay-per-view might have been in Vegas, but it was slated to be Jeff Jarrett versus Randy Savage. It wound up being Jeff Jarrett versus Brian Christopher. That's no knock on Grandmaster Sexay, but that's not the Macho Man. And my understanding was Randy asked for X amount of dollars up front, and Andrew said, what about half of that money up front? And I don't think that Macho liked that very much, but I think he kept whatever he was given. And I know Jeff Jarrett it was sour grapes with Jeff after that with Andrew McManus, because he felt Andrew dropped the ball there. He didn't come to Jeff and ask Jeff's opinion. What can we do? Jeff had a relationship with Randy. So Jeff was not really a big fan of McManus after that, although they did try to go work with Andrew and getting in TNA up and started. I wasn't sure if you were familiar with that Randy Savage story, though.
No, that would have been awesome if Savage, especially at that point, because he was still jacked and ripped, I think, at that point, right? Because that's right around the Bonesaw period, right?
Bonesaw's ready. Yeah, man, boy, was he.
It's so funny. My son, he was like recently, he's only 10, so he's watching all the old Spider-Man. He's like, oh, that original Spider-Man, he's pretty good. I like that guy. I like him better than the second guy, but the third guy, the guy Tom Holland's the best. And I go, did you recognize Bonesaw? And he goes, oh, that wrestler, he was cool. I go, you know who that is? And he goes, who is that? I was like, that's Macho Man Randy Savage. He's like, that's not Macho Man. I said, yes, it is. He's like, he looks so much bigger. Yeah. I said, that's Macho Man. He's like, oh my God. I was like, I can't believe you didn't recognize him. He's like, it didn't look like him because he's so big.
Yeah. He was pretty jacked near the end of the road there for Randy Savage, but it's kind of like I guess it wasn't meant to be, but it's certainly a huge what if. Could you imagine Randy, working in the office? He seemed pretty office available for Vince, right? When he was doing the commentary, the latter years of Randy there working side by side with Vince. But Randy booking, that would have been wild, because he had done some booking for his dad in the ICW territory and whatnot. So they certainly had some out there ideas. So it would have been really interesting to see the Macho Man, what he would have done for the business.
When you have a name that big associated with the promotion, gives it credibility right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% every time. And that was another thing Jeff mentioned too, was that instant credibility, the name value of the Macho Man Randy Savage, and maybe the Slim Jim, bring along Slim Jim or something like that. Maybe you could have got that promotion back together, the advertising. But so there's some sort of a fishing expedition, if you will. I think down in Louisiana, Bob Ryder's boat. Bob Ryder, for those of you who don't know, worked on, was it One Wrestling? I think it was One Wrestling, but he also worked behind the scenes eventually for WCW, their media, their internet, etc. And Bob Ryder had become friends with the Jarretts, and he was out there on a fishing trip, I do believe, on his boat. And Bob, I don't know that he came up with the idea. Jeff was already kind of toying. We talked about, running a wrestling company, but Bob says, why don't you put out a new wrestling company? And so they start looking around, they're reviewing options, and they decide at the very end of the day, the first thing you need is weekly episodic stories to draw the fans, which means typically, as we'd learned for the prior 40, 50 years, you need TV.
Television.
Yeah, they were not getting any television. And so then they come up with the idea, what if we did, as you said, was it $9.95, $9.99, something like that?
$9.99, yep.
$9.99 every week. And initially they wanted to run it on Tuesday nights, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And put it on pay-per-view. And Jeff talks about the story, and he calls up his dad. He says, Dad, what do you think about this? And Jerry's not, I don't want to say super excited about it, but he's not against it. He's like, well, we'll make some calls and see what we can come up with. And one of those calls was to Eric Bischoff. And apparently Eric shot it down immediately and politely said, one of the worst ideas I've ever heard in the history of the business. But I think a lot of guys were afraid to touch that. Nobody had ever tried that business model before.
Yep. Kind of one of those risky things too, because let's say 5 people order it. You know what I mean? Like, you're not getting people ordering it. You literally made no money, and you just paid Scott Hall, $1,000 to appear, or whatever, or $10,000, whatever the amount. But it's like you are paying all these guys all this amount of money, and you literally don't know how much money you're going to make, because you don't know how much people are going to order the pay-per-view initially, because it's an inaugural show. It's literally like on the ground floor. You're just trying this out. It's like a guessing game almost.
Well, Jeff, obviously grew up in a wrestling family, but not only a wrestling family, business-wise, probably the wrestling family. I mean, Jerry Jarrett was there pretty much for everything. He was called in to save Georgia, when they were in there against Ann Gunkel, and he invented Wrestling 2, for those of you who don't. Mr. Wrestling 2 was a creation of Jerry Jarrett, and, go back to Memphis and everything on down the line there. Jerry comes in case Vince McMahon goes off to prison. Bruce says no, but everybody else says yes. That's
Jerry
so
funny. The bitter Bruce, because for some reason he hates Jerry, says it's not true, but everyone else, J.J. Dillon said it was true. Like, Vince basically said it was true. Like, so many people have said it was true, except Bruce, oddly.
Why bring in Jerry at all if there's no reason to have him there? I know he was miserable up there. They were saying how he became an alcoholic, drinking bottles of wine daily, I guess, and hating to be. We hear a lot of guys hated being up in Connecticut, but
worse. Yeah.
But Jerry, he had a lot of success. He'd been around the pay-per-view model, the market. He'd been around TV. He knew pretty much everything you could ever need to know. And Jeff wanted to pick his dad's brain, and they come up with a business plan. Jeff Jarrett going to put in 65% up front, while Jerry would put in the additional 35%. Now, Jeff has said that came to roughly around $1 million up front, and Jeff left a little wiggle room. Of course, he left his retirement money put, very wise, and also enough money for his home loan and whatnot. So Jeff Jarrett basically, though, threw every other piece of change, fun money, we could call it if you want to, $600,000+ into the beginnings of TNA, and Jerry Jarrett the other $300+ or so. And that's kind of where it starts with just the Jarrett. We know it's going to change pretty quickly. But up front, it's really just J Sports and Entertainment, which is the Jarretts.
Kind of one of those things where it sounds risky, and it really is risky. It's like super risky. And Jeff's putting all that money. He obviously made a pretty good boatload of money, WCW, but he worked his ass off for it. He worked so many dates. He worked more than anybody else. He was doing all the house shows. So it's like, man, you worked so hard, and now you're willing to risk it all, essentially, or a lot of it, with this investment in TNA. Let's see if it works, and kind of pray that it works. And eventually, you're going to need a bigger investor, and then that's going to cause some problems. But obviously, that's a little bit down the road. It just seems like really, really risky. And Bischoff's kind of right. If you think about it, it's like, that's the idea. Like, what? No television? Like, oh, okay.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I think I heard Jeff mention something, and I've heard this for many, many years, pre-podcast era, even, that, you didn't get paid on pay-per-views for months, sometimes a year down the road, depending on the era. And Jeff knew that. Another thing, you got to take into consideration in advance. We got to be able to pay these guys. We got to be able to do all of this on what we have right now, because we're not even going to see a pay-per-view paycheck for a half a year, maybe. Up front here. So it's kind of, it's sink or swim. But, entrepreneurship and just, you can't never let the wrestling bug go, I think is what it is as well. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jerry Jarrett at this time was very successful in the construction business. He had moved away from wrestling and moved into construction. I know he was helping revamp big time gas stations like BP and things of that nature. So Jerry Jarrett had a very successful, lucrative $1 million business. I think he was making something like 15 to 20 times, which, I think his biggest payday in wrestling for a year was less than $2 million, which, that's great for an independent or territory. Yeah. But I think Jerry was making maybe 10 times that, doing the construction, but he still had that bug, he still wanted to get back into wrestling.
That's the thing. Once these guys get the itch, it's so funny. It's like, hey, I'm making, $10 million a year doing construction. Hey, Dad, you want to start a wrestling company? Hell yeah.
I guess so.
The itch.
Yeah, the itch, man. It's always there. So at this point, Jerry Jarrett is not a fan at all of Andrew McManus for whatever reason. Jeff Jarrett has had his issues with him, but I think it was Jerry that calls Jeff and says, you want to talk to this guy? Because it goes back to business, right? And that's pretty much, I guess they have some meetings, but by the end of all of the meetings and the issues and whatnot, they decide we're not going to deal with this guy. I don't know if it was trustworthiness. I don't know what it was. I don't know what he was wanting to do versus what they were wanting to do. I think Jeff might have mentioned something like McManus was a promoter, a concert promoter, right? So he just wanted to run shows, 52 shows, 52 weeks, but run shows. And Jeff wanted to sell merchandise and market things and all these, like an actual business. And Andrew McManus was just trying to run wrestling shows. I think, just a fan, at the end of the day was McManus. And that might have been another thing that hurt him here getting involved in the TNA world. But they were certainly looking at him for connections and investors.
One of those things when sometimes with the wrestling business, and obviously this comes up even nowadays, it's like, who the hell wants to invest in wrestling? Luckily enough, Tony Khan, billionaire dad, and obviously he's got a lot of money now. Obviously, he wanted to invest in it, but there's not a lot of other people out there that you would think would want to really invest in wrestling. You know what I mean? It seems like like an elite area where you'd have a hard time finding a ton of people. Like you could probably count them on one hand or two hands, how many people you could find. So McManus is probably one of those guys on the one or two hands that you'd want to find that might want to, partake in doing some wrestling and really investing in wrestling. Because I can't see at that point in time, like, okay, let's see what Bischoff. All right, let's see if Macho Man's interested. Like, there's not a ton of other people other than saying, hey, hey, Vince, you want to, which he would never do in a million years, but there's not a lot of other people that would be interested in doing it.
Yeah. No, and it's so funny. I remember my cousin used to ask me, my brother would ask me long before AEW, well before AEW, what is it going to take to ever see a WCW again? Something that's successful in comparison to the WWE. And I said two things. A billionaire who loves wrestling. And we had not seen one for so long. I thought that, it sounds on paper like it would be possible. It's plausible, but it was never happening. Then all of a sudden, enter Tony Khan, which is
took 20
crazy.
years. Yeah,
it's a billionaire who loves professional wrestling. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, it seems silly, but there it is. And and again, say what you will about AEW. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. I don't personally watch it. I'm not even knocking it. I don't have time to invest in the current product when I'm doing so much old school stuff. That's just where my where I'm happy at. But at the end of the day, I think it's great those guys have jobs. I think it's great there's an alternative. And, at the end of the day, maybe eventually I'll start watching AEW and enjoy the product when I get there. But I think it's just funny to me that there was finally a billionaire who loved professional wrestling. And that's really what it took. I was right. Not that it took a brain surgeon to figure that out, but who knew?
Technically, you nailed it. Technically, you were right. Yeah, I watch AEW like weekly. I mean, I watch every week, but I could definitely understand why it wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea and why everybody wouldn't like it. And in a way, TNA, same thing. If you don't like wrestling, like, will you be into TNA? Like, oh, they had a good match. Yeah, but what about the storyline? So that's one of the things too. And I feel like when they did the Sports Entertainment Extreme, because Russo, technically they bring him in shockingly to be the booker, even though him and Jerry Jarrett are like oil and water here. You know what I mean? Right. Like they're definitely not going to be compatible. Jeff Jarrett and Russo had a great relationship at that point. So that was kind of an interesting storyline too, where I was like, all right, so you're kind of mixing in the wrestling, the good X Division stuff with an interesting storyline that was maybe not for everybody too, but I do think he did a good job with it because he tremendous amount of heat around the guys that were in that faction that they wanted to be sports entertainment and TNA wanted to be wrestling, I think. And I always feel like that is a easy feud to do because obviously the wrestling fans will boo the sports entertainment guys and they'll do silly stuff and they'll be hated for it. And you can kind of, the Russo-rific stuff of, like totally having the midget and you know what I mean, and the hot girl and the typical Russo stuff that he loves to do, but then have that traditional wrestling fan absolutely hate it and get them booed out of the building. So there's kind of a good and bad in it. But all that to say, I could see why people wouldn't be interested in TNA at that point, but I could also see why people nowadays wouldn't be interested in AEW either.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's so funny you mentioned that because I think about a lot of that fairly often. So I love the fact that you were able to flesh that out and in the fact that you actually talk with Vince and you still call it Russo things. So I like that you're able to differentiate. That was fantastic. I was amazed.
And somebody just said to me, which it makes no sense whatsoever, they go, John, you talk down to Russo too much. I was like, talk down to him? I'm just literally kind of regurgitating what's out there and saying stuff. Yeah. But I love playing like devil's advocate, like Vince, come on, bro, come on, some of the stuff. And then some people said I was too easy on him. So I was like, well, what is it? Am I not nice to him? Am I too easy? I don't get it. But obviously, I think he knows too. There's like a Russo style of booking. Bro, the sports entertainment, bro, where's the storyline? He literally just said, I guess it was on Coach and Bro, AEW is too much wrestling. And I was like, but it is only wrestling. We're the best to wrestle. Like, that's like their thing. He's like, there's just too much wrestling on it. I won't watch it. But I'm like, but it's pro wrestling. That's Russo for you.
Growing up in the Northeast, where they had like one angle every 6 months, you'd think you would be used to wrestling. And I use that term loosely, too, because I've seen the squash matches up in New York. Kick and punch fests all day long. But I mean, to each their own. And he's certainly going to play a pivotal part here in TNA moving forward.
I feel like you got to have the wrestling, though. That's integral. Yeah. I feel like you got to have those matches in there.
That's how you settle the score. Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. I mean, that's the whole point at the end of the day. So we talked about the Jarretts here. We're going to talk a whole lot about the Jarretts, especially Jeff moving forward here on this voyage, this adventure, if you will. But there was another guy early on, and I mentioned his name earlier, Bob Ryder, who had been pivotal in the early infancy of the internet world of pro wrestling, with One Wrestling, with WCW. And Bob Ryder was his boat where the idea was first discussed of what would become TNA. And I guess I don't want to say it was Ryder's idea because I don't think that was actually the case, but Bob was a big part in pushing for this. But Jeff has told the story when it came down to it, and we sat down and he actually verbally said the exact sentence, "All right, Bob, how much money are you putting into this thing?" Ryder kind of hemmed and hawed and goose egg was basically the answer, I guess. So Bob thought this was a great idea, and it had been asking about what was profit sharing going to be about, what was my job title going to be, but no interest in investing, no risk, no reward. Happy with being an employee status here. What's Bob Ryder?
I feel like you could say it's a great idea. It's a great idea. as long as it's somebody else's money.
Yes.
Bottom line.
Yeah, that's a great idea. If it fails, it doesn't hurt me at all, right? So I still go home and I have my boat still. I don't have to return.
And if it's successful, hey, I said it was a great idea. I told you.
You always got that. Now, what do I get for the reward for me backing you, supporting you from the very beginning? No, I just because I don't know. I've never heard anything super negative about Bob. I know Jeff has said something like everybody has their own quirks, and I guess Bob probably had some quirks as well. Unfortunately, Bob passed away. It'd be great to have him on shows today. The way podcast is really, I know podcasts have been around a while. I know you've been around a while, but really exploded as far as interviews and things go. And you know that because you're doing them like crazy.
Yeah.
But in the last, 5-6 years, especially, and unfortunately, that's when Bob passed away. It was about 6 years ago, I believe. But Ryder was, there at the very beginning. He was one of the few guys on the payroll. Obviously, Jeff and Jerry, Bob Ryder. Jeremy Borasch was another guy who was essentially a jack of all trades in TNA. What do you know about Jeremy Borasch's past?
He's been it's funny, he's been around, if you really think about it, forever, because he was working as a production guy in WCW.
Yeah.
Then he was kind of not the brainchild, but one of the guys that started the WCW Live, which is kind of your first, if you really think about it, in 2000, kind of your first real podcast, because they're not doing video and they're doing not really technically radio, but it is over the internet. So that kind of was like your first ever podcast. So that was kind of his brainchild. He did that. And it's one of those things where it's like, man, then he was doing WWA, he was doing production, then he was doing some announcing, so he could do that. He was doing some hosting stuff. He was even doing some hosting stuff in WCW. He was doing some interviewing in WCW. So then you hear later on that he was part of the not only production team in WCW, he was part of the creative team in WCW. So obviously he's got a creative mind, and he's got a producer hat that he could throw on. Then he could be on screen, because he could be an interviewer and stuff. Then he could be an announcer too, which he was. So then you start seeing all this stuff, and then in TNA he becomes an announcer, and he does some interviewing and does some different things. And you hear he's a part of the creative team, and that he does have a good creative mind. He also has a great mind for shots and how you should shoot stuff and the production stuff. So when WWE hires him and puts him in NXT years later after his long TNA run, Triple H obviously falls in love with him and sees all this great stuff. A couple of years ago, he did this really great thing with Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes at a football field for the Bad Blood pay-per-view. He's done a bunch of stuff with CM Punk and Roman Reigns, like really cool stuff. It's one of those things, too, when he was in TNA, when he did the Broken Hardy stuff, he was the one that was one of the brainchild of that stuff. So when you see kind of cool stuff in WWE, in my mind, automatically, I'm like, I wonder if Jeremy Borasch did that, because it was cool, it was good. And that's one of the things you want, that you would say, wow, that's a really impressive thing, that something good happens, you actually think, I wonder if that was Jeremy Borasch. That's how much equity and credibility and believability of him being a good producer has gone over the course of the years. So when you hear about the Broken Hardy stuff, you hear about the good WWE stuff that he did. Now he's working with AAA on the creative end and the production end. Production end's been through the roof. Creative's been awesome for AAA. So man, just to rattle on maybe too long about Borasch, but man, he's been around forever. Literally jack of all trades, but apparently, as they say, master of none. That's not true. He seems like he's the master of all.
Yeah, I would agree. And, that's exactly what I have here in my notes. I refer to him as the jack of all trades, from my understanding. I knew, and I'd watched the Hardy compound matches, so I have seen those. How do you not go? I remember, all right, I'll go cue this up on YouTube or whatever, wherever they aired it after it aired on, the TV programming. And I remember watching those and going, wow. I mean, I didn't know what I had seen, especially the first one. What the hell did I just see? But not in a bad way. Yeah, not in a bad way. No, it was something very different. And, and I remember when Triple H was putting his team together for the future before Vince comes in and changes NXT and everything goes wonky. And then, everything that's happened since then. But I remember Borasch was supposed to be the lead guy on the production for Triple H in regards to, like you said, some of the stuff that was going on there. I didn't know he was in AAA now. I know they purchased AAA, so I'm happy to hear they found something good for him to do. On a big scale there. There's a lot to sink your teeth into with running or producing part of, promotions and things. And I'm glad to hear he's still got a job, because he certainly deserves a job. He's a guy I look forward to paying attention to here when I go through TNA. He's going to be on the payroll full time. Another guy that they bring in is a name. Tony Schiavone was great in WCW for name dropping guys. Really appreciative was Tony of the guys behind the scenes. because we would hear a handful of those names all the time. So when you see the credits roll, you go, Tony talks about that, but I don't know who they are. I couldn't picture, I don't know what they look like if I saw them tomorrow, but you knew the names because of Tony. Tony would reference them and give them shout outs, Craig Leathers, guys like that. Another one was Keith Mitchell, who was a major production name in the world of wrestling, going back all the way back to World Class Championship Wrestling in Dallas. In the 1980s, eventually he'd come to the WCW. He'd work there till the demise, come to TNA, he'd work there till the wheels fell off, and now I think he's in AEW.
Crazy thing with Keith is like, man, like, it's 40 years of wrestling here, you know what I mean? And his name always pops up, and he's been in so many different organizations. He's done so many different things in wrestling. But I feel like that's kind of great if you're looking like Jeff, right? You go, I need somebody. Keith Mitchell is the guy. Like, that's pretty key. And
you don't have to explain anything to him. He understands the production of pro wrestling, where to be. And that goes back to Dallas, right? I mean, those guys came into Fritz and told Fritz how shit was going to be. It wasn't Fritz going, this is my wrestling company and this is how shit works. It was, okay, that's fine. Gary Hart talks about that. He had to finally bite the bullet, take him aside, explain to him how the sausage is made, if you will, and whatnot, so that they could understand how to have the cameras where they needed to be and what they needed to do. And Keith Mitchell picked up on that early on, and off to the races he goes. And 40 plus years later, he's still very productive in the wrestling business. In the job that he does, which is very successful. And they get Keith early on, as well as I think it was like Scene 3 or something like that is the company that they work with. Because one thing Jeff did that Vince did not do, that Turner did not do, was third-party everything. If you were not a wrestler in the ring, it was third-party production, third-party, lighting, third-party. We weren't paying guys on a payroll to come to work once a week. And so Jeff was smart in the fact that everything was outsourced, essentially. So there's a lot of overhead gone from, what Vince was paying people.
And that's funny because that's what a lot of sports do today. People don't realize, like NFL, MLB, NBA, golf, all these. I mean, they're paying third-party, basically. I mean, they can maybe use the same people all the time, but it's basically you're paying third-party production people for stuff because you don't want people on the payroll. You're working here, you're working there. Maybe it's 1 day a week, maybe it's 2 days a week. So pretty smart by Jarrett to do that. I think maybe even cheaply by Jarrett.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A great way to save costs. I mean, the overhead is you're paying the talent. It's essentially an indie show, a very high-tech indie show in a lot of ways. I mean, like I said, there's a few guys on the payroll, Ryder, Borasch, but you need those guys. Those guys are very helpful in what they do. So I understand that, but the structure is very interesting, and it makes sense. We're running once a week. Why do we need our own lighting company? Why do we need our own camera crew, et cetera? So another guy that Jeff said he went to early on was Mark Miller, who was the lead singer of Sawyer Brown. Some girls do. Everybody might remember Jeff going up there and singing that song with Sawyer Brown. They're no strangers to pro wrestling. They actually first appeared on Memphis TV many years before that, in the very early infancy of the Harris brothers, Ron and Don Harris, when they first broke in, clean-cut, baby-face-looking guys back in that day. And Sawyer Brown, the Mark Miller, he had went to high school with the Harris twins, so he knew them, and he gave them jobs, specifically Ron Harris, a job working for him. And so that's why this is a weird name, because Jeff said he got some legal advice and some other things from Mark Miller, because Mark Miller ran his band. He handled it. He was the owner, if you will, kind of like Vince runs, the WWE. Mark Miller ran Sawyer Brown. And so Jeff hires on one half of the Blue Twins, one half of the Grimm Twins, one half of the Bruise Brothers, if you will, Ron Harris, because Ron Harris had a lot of knowledge because he had continuously been hired when he was off from wrestling by Mark Miller. So Ron Harris had general arena production skills. So you look at this Blue Twin, this DOA, this perhaps neo-Nazi, I'm not really sure. I'm just, I've heard some things with the tattoos and whatever, but it's kind of crazy to hear like Ron Harris. Can you picture him? I mean, I know we're going to see him, but can you picture him in a business suit or something like that?
Kind of crazy, not at all, and definitely not. But that's the story I always heard. And even years later, running a production company, running shows, and doing this, doing that, and it's just like, wow, like how the hell did he get in? I didn't realize that's how he got in originally, because I always heard he had so much experience. So that's pretty fascinating. That Sawyer Brown, who made a WWF appearance, oddly.
Yes, absolutely. Some girls do. Oh, yeah. Oh, man. So we talked about how Jerry Jarrett called Eric Bischoff and kind of pitched them the idea, and Eric just thought it was a terrible idea and wanted no part of it. Another guy that Jerry Jarrett called to try to get involved was J.J. Dillon, believe it or not. And J.J. had many, many years of experience. Yes, a great friend of Jerry Jarrett. That's why he called J.J. But J.J. had been in the office with Dusty in Florida, been in the office with Dusty for Crockett, been in the office with Vince from 1989 until 1990 through at least through 95. And he eventually comes back to WCW and works there until the end of WCW. So JJ has had a lot of experience working in the office. And that was kind of Jeff's problem. It wasn't Jerry. That was Jerry's boy, was JJ Dillon. But Jeff said he always saw JJ as one of the boys and didn't necessarily trust JJ, but he couldn't pinpoint why. He said Dillon never did anything to him, but he just heard so many stories over the years that Jeff said, I couldn't pull the trigger. I couldn't bring JJ in.
I love JJ, but obviously, interviewing millions of guys, you hear all that stuff too. And could he be trusted and things like that? Russo always kind of mentioned it, like, because Sullivan and JJ were boys. And, when Russo comes in, he saw all the politics that those guys were playing behind his back. And what the guys were telling him that they were playing behind their back. So yeah, there was probably so many instances of political nonsense that Jeff Jarrett just didn't want to deal with it.
Well, Jeff says he knows that spot that JJ had was the heat spot, right? Bruce found that out too after Bruce wanted that spot. Jim Ross did okay with it, but a lot of the other guys that had that spot, they were not well liked by the boys for one reason or another. So it was kind of like that. It was the management spot, so to speak, right? So that way you take all the heat, and that's kind of what JJ did. And Jeff said, and that's why I love the wrestling business. It's like, I don't trust JJ. I don't know why, but we're cool. When I see him, we're cool. But I'm sitting here on my podcast saying, I don't trust JJ. But that's wrestling in a freaking nutshell, man. I try to stay out of that bubble, man. I hate being back in that bubble. So it's kind of weird to run podcasts and video casts all about wrestling, talk with wrestlers, and yet I've seen the bubble. I've been in that bubble, and I don't want to touch the other side of that bubble. So it's a fine line that I walk, John. But I
it's
try to do it.
Weird business.
It certainly is. So let me ask you, I'm going to throw a name at you, and I don't think we're going to get too deep into him this episode, but I'm curious, do you remember the name Jay Hassman and what he had to do with TNA early on?
Yes, just because I was listening to Jarrett's podcast and kind of hearing that this guy, maybe they're not the most honest guy in the world.
Right. My understanding was they hired him for pay-per-view distribution. He was going to handle the distribution, and he was giving them facts and figures, and we'll get a little more detail in that because I have a lot of notes on this guy and what he does. But early on, we're not there yet. The pay-per-views haven't launched yet, so we won't talk too much. But keep an eye out or an ear out for that name moving forward, because this guy is going to be giving them facts and figures that maybe aren't necessarily factual. Yes. Let's just put it that way. And it's really going to screw with them early on here in the world of TNA. And that brings us to the name TNA, John. And it was put together, double entendre, you can tell, TNA, tits and ass, but also TNA was originally, did you ever hear this? Originally supposed to stand for Tuesday Night Attitude.
Yes.
Was the original pay-per-view idea, Tuesday Night Attitude.
I thought that was kind of an interesting, obviously, play on words, but that's like so Russo, like, bro, TNA. And then obviously it was originally going to be on Tuesday nights. So it was like, oh, we got Attitude, kind of making fun of or talking about WWF and how he created the Attitude Era. Tuesday Night Attitude. I feel like that was always like something that he kind of would come up with. Even though I don't even know if he's technically part of the planning of that. It just seems like something that he would be a part of.
Well, Jeff has openly admitted that he doesn't know who came up with TNA necessarily, but he talked with Russo more than anybody going in to TNA.
Right.
So I'm sure
makes sense.
I'm sure Vince had a lot of input in the idea of the TNA name. But it's so
interesting, too. At that point, Vince was brought back to WWF, which I guess a lot of people probably forget or maybe not know, but Russo's brought back in by Vince McMahon because he didn't like what was going on in 02 and kind of the direction where they were headed. But then obviously politics played a huge role with not only Triple H and Stephanie, but Heyman all kind of bad-mouthing him, and everyone kind of, and Bruce, of course, too, all trying to knock down Russo. Russo's like, I don't know if I want a part of this. Then he gets the call from Jeff And obviously Jeff's like, hey, I want to start this league. I think we need a writer. I think it's going to be you. So it's interesting. Russo's almost like, oh, man, I don't want to deal with this political nonsense and WWF where everyone's bad-mouthing me before I even really start. I'd rather go to TNA and do this. So it's funny that Russo is kind of right in the middle, but he kind of could have went back to WWF if he really wanted to go through that again.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. That leads me to another thought, that I didn't have in my notes here, but I've been covering it on the Monday Warfare show right now. And that's Jerry Jarrett was in a similar boat when he's hired in 1995 as a consultant by WCW. He doesn't even have to come to the shows. They just call him for ideas.
Yep.
So Jerry Jarrett's getting paid six figures by WCW to be an idea man at home. Meanwhile, he's also on the payroll of the WWF in an era where Vince is not paying anybody he doesn't have to in 1995. So Jerry Jarrett was actually getting paid by both companies at the same time.
Pretty
crazy.
He
wasn't even hiding it. I mean, it wasn't like a secret. So that's
crazy. Yeah.
That goes back to showing you how important he was to the wrestling business and why he was important to the beginnings here of structuring TNA.
Absolutely. And he seems like one of those guys that he knows everything. You know what I mean? Like he's booking, he's wrestling, he knows production, he knows creative, he knows, merchandise, he knows licensing, he knows how to film. Yeah, just like everything you could possibly do with wrestling. He's been there, done that, and probably, would do it again tomorrow kind of thing, obviously at that point. So he's one of those guys, kind of like an unsung hero MVP of like wrestling throughout the year.
Yeah, 100%. It's so weird to think, everybody mocks Memphis, the cartoon Mickey Mouse territory, the monsters and things of that nature. And it's such a small territory on top of all of that. It was successful. I mean, look at the shares and the ratings and everything it did. But at the same time, I mean, what could a guy that runs the Memphis territory know about wrestling as a whole, national? Apparently a whole lot, right? So, I mean, Jerry just chose to sit at home in the mansion in Hendersonville. That was the whole deal. It's like, I could do more. I just don't want to. I don't have to.
You're getting paid 2 paychecks. You don't have to go anywhere.
That's right. He's getting paid to sit at home by both the big two at the same time. And if Paulie actually paid people, he might have paid Jerry too. Who knows?
True.
Well, so we talked about it. TNA, the original idea, Tuesday night attitude. Now, that doesn't really happen, but Jeff said the idea behind Tuesday nights was it was a big TV night. We know a lot of great TV shows, huge ratings on. People watch TV. It was the middle of the week. There was nothing else to do. You watch TV. There were no tablets and things of that nature. Again, everybody didn't have a computer yet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you did. Yep.
Also, if you remember, I'm sure you do, John, if you watched a pay-per-view on Sunday night, it was live, but if you didn't catch the pay-per-view, they would tell you to tune in Tuesday night for the replay. And there was a lot of boxing fights that would do the same thing, Tuesday night fights. And that's because it was just a big night for television. And so Jerry Jarrett thought impulse buys, Jeff Jarrett agreeing, impulse buys Tuesday night. People want to watch some fights, some action. They'll go with TNA, something different. So they really wanted Tuesday night. Now, as we know, unfortunately, that doesn't work. They wind up having to settle for Wednesday night.
Kind of like a weird night, though. If you think about it, it's like Wednesday night wrestling. I know now, obviously, with AEW and NXT at one point was Wednesday night. Obviously, no more, thanks to AEW. But it's one of those things where, like, I don't know if that fits. You know what I mean? Like Monday felt right. Like Friday sometimes. Tuesday felt right in a weird way. Thursday kind of like Wednesday.
I loved Thursday because that was my day. I had nothing to do. I felt like Thursday was the day that nothing was ever on. So when Thunder was there or SmackDown was there, it was like I like my wrestling.
Thursday
on
makes
Thursday
sense,
nights.
but Wednesday feels weird. It's like really Wednesday, right? SmackDown in the middle of the week. I don't know. For some reason, I always thought that was almost like the weirdest day to have.
Well, and they had a great idea up front, too. Not only was Tuesday a big night for television and people sitting at home and wanting to watch TV, but they were going to be able to air their commercials during Raw. So now people I'm going to watch that. It's tomorrow. I won't forget tomorrow. Now, you're 48 hours later. It's a different story. I got 2 whole days of things going on. I could forget all about it. But tomorrow I wake up and go, man, that wrestling thing, you see that commercial? Let's check that out. And so none of this happens, unfortunately. And so TNA shifts from Tuesday night attitude to total nonstop action, which was another play against Vince and company because they have commercials and TNA is no commercial free is what it is. And of course, again, TNA, tits and ass, so you never know what you're going to expect. But I do like that. Total non-stop action is what they're selling you guys. There's no commercials because it's pay-per-view.
It's one of those things, too, where this had to come into play. Obviously, Girls Gone Wild was huge with the pay-per-views, and that kind of pay-per-view. Calling it TNA, I feel like they were trying to get attention on pay-per-view where people thought it was porn. You know what I mean? But in a weird way, it's almost like that diminishes the wrestling product. So when you obviously add in the NWA, so it's wrestling, but it's weird. I think they're definitely going oddly for that like porno fan, like TNA, Girls Connection. What is this? You know what I mean?
And I think that's the issue where Jeff and Jerry collide, the Jarretts. And not only are they father and son, so there's always going to be that dynamic coupled with business, especially when the son has the majority of the stake. You know what I mean? Overriding dad, who's had decades of experience. Who are you to doubt El Dandy, kind of, sort of, you know what I mean? But it's fun because we know Jerry's going to bow out by the end of the year. Spoiler alert, guys. And for various reasons, but one of them is because Jerry wanted to take an old school wrestling. This was going to be wrestling. Not Jim Cornette, the way you like it, way it used to be, but still in many ways, the way you like it, the way it used to be. It was going to be wrestling. And Jeff was more on that Vince Russo train, maybe not all the way full go Vince Russo, but Jeff was, open to, again, TNA, what could that possibly mean kind of deal. And you hit the nail on the head. I know when I heard it, I go, are there going to be like breasts flopping around every week on this show? I mean, I don't know. What's going to happen?
It is, because you got the girls in the cage, remember? The
Go-Go girls.
The Go-Go girls, yes. So you kind of did have that aspect a little bit, which is also kind of weird. You turn in a wrestling show and you see these girls in cages dancing. So I didn't mind it, but being a young whippersnapper there, a young fan, but it is kind of weird, like looking back, like that's kind of intriguing, but it is pay-per-view, so you never know what you're going to see.
You never know what you're going to get out there. So by default, at that point, when they go to pay-per-view right out of the gate, Jeff Jarrett has stated that we were already number 2. We had pay-per-view. So we weren't competing to be the number 2 promotion. We were competing to be the alternative wrestling from whatever Vince's product was offering. So now we go back to that whole, we've heard Eric say it a million times, what does Vince do? I need to do all of those opposite. And that was kind of what Jeff Jarrett felt here, or at least not necessarily do everything opposite, but certainly take a different approach to the product. One of those being the X division.
That's one of the things that to me stood out, because I was like, I love the WCW Cruiserweight division. It kind of died off for a while, but towards the end of WCW, they were building it back up again with Shane Helms and the Young Dragons and Kevin Courageous, the 3-count guys, Chavo Guerrero Jr., Rey Mysterio, Kidman, and obviously the Cruiserweight Tag Team Tournament, which obviously created Cruiserweight Tag Team Champions. So I feel like I love that kind of stuff because I like the buffet. I like the main event guys. I like the Scott Steiners and the Booker T's. And all and then on down, but I like the excitement of let's start off the card hot, let's have these cool matches, and that's where the X division came to play. I was like, man, they're leaving off where the X division was, or the Cruiserweight division was starting to build back up again. This felt like 1996 Cruiserweight division with the X division because man, these guys low key, AJ, Christopher Daniels, Jerry Lynn, Amazing Red, Psychosis, Kazarian eventually, Chris Sabin eventually. It just felt like, man, we're getting all these good wrestlers, and we're going to get to see this outside of, let's see, Jarrett versus Shamrock or R-Truth eventually comes in the main event. But these guys are separate. These guys are like the workhorses. These are the good matches. This is the stuff that I'm going to rewatch, or maybe I'll go back and watch it again because I love the action of it.
And I know you're a big fan of Jeff Jarrett, Hulk Hogan. Yep. I'm not going to lump Hogan into this because he wasn't even part of the main events in WCW by this point, but Scott Steiner and things of that nature. By that point, those guys didn't interest me. But this has been going on in WCW for me for the last few years. I love the pay-per-views, but I would tune out the main event. It would stay on. I would record the whole pay-per-view, but whatever the main event was, I was already clocked out. I was like, I saw everything I came to see. Great shit. I'm over it. Okay, here's the Scott Steiner, the Kevin Nash, whoever's headlining.
Hey, those Steiner matches are pretty good. Steiner DDP, really good.
Well, I'll have to go back and check those out. So I'll take
Steiner Sid from Starrcade. You'd be shocked. It's good.
I feel bad for Sid's leg later on there, but yeah,
don't remind me.
But, it was kind of like that with TNA for me. Even though I didn't watch it, I saw the names. I'm like, okay, well, I probably wouldn't like that. But, man, and you read the results, you go, but I would love to see, A, B, and C. I'm not so interested in D, but A, B, and C. Sign me up. And, again, for $10, I'm there for it. And so we talked about the difference between Jeff and Jerry. And a lot of people are going, well, it wasn't called TNA when it started, right? Technically, it was a little bit of a longer title. And that's because it was the NWA TNA, National Wrestling Alliance, for those of you who don't know. And I guess that was the tradition value. You talked about Randy Savage being a name value. He would have been a hell of a name value, But I think Jerry Jarrett believed in the NWA name still at that point. A little bit of a tradition behind it anyway. There was still some hangers on, I suppose. They wanted to come check this out based on the name NWA. It does add value, I think, at the beginning.
I think you almost need that at the beginning, because if you just say, all right, TNA, like, what is that? What total nonstop action? Like, that's wrestling? Total nonstop? Like, right. What do we watch here? Like, what in the heck? So I feel like you almost needed that, especially in the beginning. I know eventually they get rid of it and it just becomes TNA, and that's fine. And I think that they did it at the right point in time and moved on at the right point in time. But when you first started, I feel like you definitely needed something that would scream, this is like your wrestling alternative. What better than NWA, which kind of, which obviously has so much cachet, it's ridiculous. Maybe not as big as it once was, but when you say NWA, everyone knows it's wrestling.
Yeah, and I think that was, like you said, it was good to add that value to it. Okay, well, now they're associated with the NWA, which really hasn't meant a whole lot since, Turner took over and we slowly phased out. And I know they continued to go on in the independence and whatnot, but now they're bringing those world titles here, at least early on here, to TNA. And so there's some kind of back history. There's some kind of structure. I knew the NWA as a kid, so it meant something to me. Okay, all right, this is the new NWA is what this is. NWA is making a comeback. So for people of my age, at least, and maybe even older than me, they were like, okay, yeah, all right. So I think that was another great coup to kind of get involved with the NWA name early on and use that, at least in the inception of TNA, to get people to go, oh, this is a serious, real wrestling company.
It fit, too, because if you needed something, you don't have Macho Man, you need something like, okay, NWA works, and we'll use them. And you can actually tie in some of the lineage and almost act like this isn't your first show, so to speak. Like you could tie in a video package, or you bring in Dory Funk and Harley Race and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and you tie that into your promotion. Old meets new, and this is where we are in the future. It's almost like you're not just launching out of nowhere. You're almost giving yourself a backstory. You're almost giving yourself a bit of history to kind of give yourself a little bit more credibility as you stumble upon your first show and hopefully make it successful.
Right. And so the idea, the beginnings of TNA develop in the brain of Jeff Jarrett, I guess. I mean, they had already had some ideas in the past, but by January, the business plan was being put together. And by May, they announced it. It's coming, a launch night, if you will. I believe it's early May 9th, rings a bell. Maybe I could be a little off by a few days, but somewhere early in the month of May 2002, it's announced, it's put out there on the internet that there's a new wrestling promotion in town. It's coming to you live every Wednesday night on pay-per-view, $9.99 or whatever. What'd you say? $95, I don't think it really matters, but fairly affordable price tag if you're a true wrestling fan anyway. And so it's set. The date is set, I believe, for, what is it, July 19th? June. Oh, June 19th. That's right. June 19th. So they've only got about 6 weeks tops to really get this thing in gear. I mean, it's word of mouth and it's internet. And we're talking 2002 internet, man. That's a long time ago. That's still a lot of people, including myself, had dial-up still in 2002.
Yeah, same here. Just one of those things where, I don't know, it's almost like okay, the NWA, great, put a part of it. Okay, we're TNA, we're moving forward. We got Jeff Jarrett, we got his dad. Russo's going to be writing this thing. Like, okay, but it's almost like, man, it's like too big for their britches type of thing. It's like, I don't know about that. You know what I mean? It's just like very risky. And then there's not enough pub, and like, how can they really get their name out there? It is very, very risky. Me being a super wrestling fan that could follow it, but what if like you're trying to get casuals? They're not going to be able to catch on to it.
Well, there's a lot of weird things early on. They're trying a lot of things early here in TNA too. I do remember that. It's You can tell there's two different people. It maybe not, but it feels like there's two different styles booking. It's certainly just testing the waters of what's working, what's not going to work. Lots of sports-based wrestling, but there's also that new X Division style coming in, which does work.
Yeah,
Toby Keith runs through there. I mean, there's a lot of
that
things
was awesome.
going on.
And I was gonna say, and then you get like the most random things, like people popping up. Like you literally don't know who's gonna pop up.
No. Whoever needs a payday that week. I mean, there were guys dressing up like Elvis Presley. There was all sorts of weird and random gimmicks. Yeah, we got the hardcore midgets coming to town. I mean, there was a lot of random chicks. I mean, not against sorry ladies out there, but there was a lot of women early on. I remember there was was there a battle royal or something? I don't remember what it was, but there was just. It was just loaded with girls I'd never even heard of, and like Francine and things like anybody who needed a job, and it was chaos. They were really trying to figure themselves out.
You literally throw everything at the wall and like whatever sticks. Like literally, that's what they were doing because they brought in like everybody. Almost, I remember being such a big fan at that point. I would write down each like surprise, and like my paper after a few weeks was like almost like okay, Toby Keith, okay, Scott Hall, like what the heck, and I was like, okay, Nikita Koloff randomly popped, Vader. Dusty Rhodes, the Legion of Doom. It's like Roddy Piper. Just like, man, it was just really cool in essence because you never knew who's going to show up. But also, it's like kind of crazy because it's like and then like you said, Francine, all the women are like they'll throw anybody out there. They did the Alan Funk shows up and Lenny Lane and like what I mean, like just felt like anything that they could try, they would try, and let's see if it sticks. Which kind of could be good, but also could be like, man, I don't know about that. Like sometimes not so good.
Well, I think it took them months to really figure out their identity. What do we want to be? What are we? They needed like one guy to sit down and bro, and I don't know who would necessarily that would eventually become, but somebody needed to figure out what this is and what we're going to do with it because it was like, I'm not saying this is how it was done, but it felt like Jeff Jarrett would book like 2 segments and Jerry Jarrett would book like 2 segments. Like, what are we watching? I'm not exactly sure what I got here based on the 2 episodes that I remember, but also based on just the things I would read, the little clips I would see. So I would just go, I don't understand. Last week it was a wrestling match. Now they're doing comedy. I wasn't really sure what they were going for. And it really felt like they're just trying to figure out, like you said, throw everything against the wall, whatever sticks, and we'll keep rolling with. And
just to throw this out there too, Curb Your Enthusiasm obviously made this extremely popular and just extremely successful at it. Larry David would not give you a script. You get bullet points. Okay. You as the actor have to figure out what the character would say, but you have to follow the bullet points. So there's a script per se. There's a where you want to go. This was Russo's idea too. I don't know if he necessarily got it from Larry David, but he would basically kind of surprise the guys. Like when Piper shows up, that's a complete surprise. Jarrett pulled a Russo on Russo. I wanted to see how you would react. I wanted to see what your character would say and do and stuff. So that is an interesting thing. To a point, I kind of like that, like the bullet points and kind of do that. But I feel like you don't want to surprise the guys too much because you're almost like trying to work the boys. And you don't want to do that because they want to know what direction they're going in going forward.
And they're going to become worried that what are they going to do next time? Yes. And you can't focus on what you're out there.
Is Piper going to surprise me and say, "Hey, you killed my cousin Owen Hart," and like you know what I mean, like which does happen in TNA. So it's like great, and then Russo had to react to that because he didn't really know what the hell was happening. So in a way, it's kind of like you're getting something raw and something real, but then it's like, what direction are you going in with this? This is kind of crazy. Larry David obviously perfected it because he had the bullet points of what they wanted to go. But he said the characters were so good, and that's why he hired them because they were such good actors that they could make it work if he just told them where they were going to go and kind of bullet point them. And I think Russo wanted to go for that, but it was almost too much freedom of like trying to work the boys type of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's getting ready to hit the launch in June of 2002. It won't take long. I think by the end of July, they've got Jay Hassman kind of figured out, and the facts and figures he's throwing at him may not be on the level, so to speak, unfortunately. And that really is unfortunate because he had been around helping pro wrestling, but in the pay-per-view world too, the marketing, for quite a while. Yep. So it was kind of surprising, but apparently, things do go awry. We'll talk about that. We'll cover the news like we do on Monday Warfare as we go along with the TV. in the future, guys. So with the pay-per-views, I should say, not the TV, but we're gonna do it week by week, just like we do with all of our stuff. We're gonna break it down, analyze it, and enjoy it. I'm certainly gonna do my damnedest to enjoy it, even if it's bad. I'm gonna enjoy it. Just be prepared for my comments.
They will eventually get television, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. Yeah, it will. It's coming. Yeah. But we'll talk about the slow demise in 2002, what almost went away if it wasn't for the likes of Panda Energy and Dixie Carter and things like that. So I'm looking forward to all of that and following this story. I haven't really watched it, but I do remember bits and pieces. I do know the talent. I saw a lot of those guys locally. I worked with a lot of those guys back in this time period. AJ Styles, fantastic guy. Frankie Kazarian, fantastic guy. Jerry Lynn was awesome. I don't know how he ate the carbs he did and continued to remain in the great shape he was, drinking the beers and eating all those loaded potato skins every night when we would hang out and things. So these guys were amazing, and it's going to be great to go back and watch these guys in the prime, their prime years, and getting to see what they did for TNA. And I'm really excited for it. And John, anytime you're available, man, we'd love to have you for some of the pay-per-views.
Hey, I'm in. I love it. I love that stuff. I used to actually, when TNA eventually made the DVDs, I used to love to go back and watch like the compilation DVDs, like the AJ, because they would put like a ton of stuff. Jarrett had a 4-disc compilation. So like that's like kind of unheard of. Usually WWE does 2 discs, 3 discs, like they would do 4. So they did some good stuff. America's Most Wanted was great. Raven was great. So there's a lot of stuff, I think, especially when Raven gets there, like you'll really kind of enjoy and really like. But to me, X Division, that kind of kicked it off, and that was special, kind of started out. Even though sometimes in some other parts of the show, you're like, oh, God, we got to get through this to get through that. Oh, but then we get Low Key versus AJ in a match for 15 minutes. Like, okay, that saved it. So that happened a bunch.
I was looking at the results of the first few weeks and just the names that pop out. Ken Shamrock, AJ Styles, Low Key, Jerry Lynn. I'm looking at York and Matthews. They just, they worked the latter stages of ECW as a tag team as well. So, I mean, I'm just looking through these names, like you said, Chris Harrison, James Storm, Psychosis, and the list goes on and on, man. I'm looking forward to covering these matches. And hey, how about Cheeks? Can't wait to get to the story of Cheeks and what
breaking that damn ring, that bastard.
Damn near ended TNA before it began, basically. And we'll talk about that and a whole lot more in the weeks to come. Before we wrap things up, though, John, tell everybody once again what's going on in the two-man power trip world.
So follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Also check out the not the website, the YouTube. That's what I really want to. You can check out the website too, patreon.com/TMPT Empire. But the YouTube got a lot of great stuff coming up on there and stuff that I recently put up there. Really, really good interview with Vampiro. Like, I was blown away by how great he was of an interview. Coming up, the Demon, Dale Torborg, doing a little bit of a rare interview. Roger Sartan, the territory star. I feel like that could be cool too. A really fun interview with him. Did an interview with a wrestling journalist and MMA journalist, Todd Martin. Got over a lot of cool stuff with him. The new Tiger Ali Singh limited series, we're calling it, but podcast with Tiger Ali Singh, which has been great so far because a lot of the stories that I've heard through the years but that have been said by Bruce and Jim Ross, I've always heard are not true. And Tiger's kind of exposing that. And he seems like a very honest person to me. I know some people online were saying to me, like, oh, you can't believe Tiger and stuff. I was like, I don't know. Like, and even talking to him off air, like a lot of this stuff, he's in a really, really good place mentally and obviously doing really good with his dad's public schools and like their charities and everything. So, and his foundation. So it doesn't seem like he'd be making stuff up at this point. Obviously, there's a lawsuit that was out there that WWE lost, because of Jim Ross. So no offense to JR. I love JR. And hopefully he's doing okay. But obviously, Tiger, there's more truth that's out there. And then, of course, Russo was on to talk the last Final Nitro. We'll be having him back to talk about Bash at the Beach. So a lot of good stuff. Check me out. Just follow me at 2Man Power Trip on Twitter and Instagram. You'll see all the stuff there. And then, of course, check out the YouTube as well.
Oh, excellent, man. Lots going on in the world of the two-man power trip empire. This has been John Poz joining us for the inception here of Talking TNA. It's total nonstop adventure, and I'm looking forward to it next week. Next time, we're going to kick it all off with the very first pay-per-view. Going to go back and dissect the first pay-per-view of the NWA TNA going back to June 19th in 2002. We hope you guys will be here for it. Part of the ultimate tier at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Hope to see you there. Leave us some feedback, guys. We're looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you, John, for doing this with me, man.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, guys. More Talking TNA right around the corner.
Peace.